I showed my American mom an Australian school day last Tuesday morning. She sat at our kitchen bench in Brisbane with a cup of tea, watching me walk her through what my mate's kids actually do between 8:30 and 3. She made about 40 minutes before she put the cup down, looked at me, and said, "Wait, stop, go back. They get how long for what?" And then she didn't say anything for nearly a minute. That moment, right there, is the reason I'm making this video. In the next 17 minutes, I'm going to walk you through a full Australian school day, exactly the way I walked my mom through it. I'm going to show you the 8 things that stopped her cold, the one rule at recess that she literally refused to believe until I pulled up the school's website, the moment she said, "America got this wrong, didn't we?" And the question she asked me at the end that I still don't have a good answer for. If you're an Aussie watching this and you've got grandkids in primary school, 3 of these things are happening in your grandkids' day this week, and you probably don't even realize how unusual they are. But the part that genuinely got me, the part one almost cut from this video because it felt too personal, is what my mom did after we finished. She didn't go to bed. She sat there for another 2 hours on her phone, and what she was looking up changed the whole tone of her trip. I'll get to that near the end. Don't skip it. All right, let me set the scene properly. My mom flew into Brisbane 3 weeks ago. She's a retired school teacher from Ohio. 31 years in American public schools. She's seen everything. The lockdown drills, the metal detectors, the lunchroom that runs on a 22-minute clock, the parents arguing about textbooks at school board meetings. She is not a woman who is easily impressed by education systems. She's the toughest possible audience for this. So I told her, "Mom, before you go home, I want to walk you through what a normal school day looks like for an Aussie kid. Not a private school, not some fancy boarding place, just a regular state primary school, the kind my mate Dave's 2 kids go to 10 minutes from where we're sitting." She said, "How different can it really be?" That's a direct quote. I wrote it down because of what came next. We started at 8:30 in the morning. First thing she noticed, and this was before we even got to the classroom, is that the kids walked to school. Not all of them, but a huge chunk. In her last district in Ohio, she told me the bus routes had been redrawn 3 times in 5 years because parents wouldn't let their kids walk more than 2 blocks. Here in our suburb, you see 7-year-olds in those wide-brimmed school hats walking in pairs, sometimes with a parent at the corner, sometimes not. She watched a group of them from the front window and said, "When did America stop doing that?" I didn't have an answer. Then we got to the hat rule. This is where she first laughed out loud. In Queensland, and across most of Australia, there's a thing called no hat, no play. If you don't have your school hat, you sit in the shade. You don't get recess. It's not a suggestion. It's the rule. According to the Cancer Council of Australia, this policy has been credited with helping drop melanoma rates in younger Australians significantly over the last 20 years. My mom, who lost her older brother to skin cancer in 2011, got very quiet when I told her that. She said, "We don't do that. We don't do anything like that." And we moved on, but I could tell that one stuck. Now here's where the day really starts to diverge. And this is the part where, if you're an American watching, you're going to feel something twist a little bit. I want you to stick with me because the next 40 minutes of our morning is where my mom stopped being a tourist and started being a teacher again. The first big stop was lunchboxes. In our state primary, kids bring lunch from home. There's a tuck shop, that's the canteen, but most kids bring a packed lunch. There's no cafeteria line. There's no lunch debt. There's no kid getting a cold cheese sandwich because their parents are 3 weeks behind on payments. My mom looked at me and said, "Yemo, do you know how many of my students went hungry because of lunch debt?" And then she told me a story about a 9-year-old boy in 2017 whose tray was taken away in front of his class because his account was $41 in the red. $41. She still remembers his name. I'm not going to say on camera. She asked me, "Does Australia have lunch debt?" I told her, and I had to actually look this up to make sure I wasn't lying to her, that the concept barely exists here in the same way. Schools in financial hardship situations work directly with families through the school chaplain or welfare officer. Nobody publicly shames a kid in a lunch line because the lunch line doesn't exist. She just shook her head, and we got a recess. And this is where she stopped me. Hard. Like put her hand up, stopped me. I was explaining that in most Australian primary schools, the kids get two breaks. There's a morning tea break, sometimes called little lunch, around 10:30, that runs about 20 minutes. Then there's the proper lunch break around 12:30, which is usually 40 to 50 minutes, sometimes split into an eating portion and a play portion. So all up, an Aussie primary school kid is getting roughly an hour of unstructured outdoor play in the middle of their school day. Every single day. My mom said, "An hour?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "An hour outside?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Yemo, our kids get 15 minutes." She wasn't exaggerating. According to a survey published by the American Academy of Pediatrics, the average American elementary school provides somewhere between 15 and 27 minutes of recess per day, and roughly 40% of U.S. school districts have either reduced or eliminated recess in the last 15 years. She lived through that policy change. She fought on her staff. She lost. She went quiet again. And then she said something I want you to hear. She said, "We took play away from kids and called it rigor." And it didn't work. The test scores didn't even go up. That's when I knew this conversation wasn't going where I thought it was going. Now stay with me, because we haven't even got to the afternoon yet. And there's something my Aussie neighbor Lorraine said to my mom at the front fence that night that I think you need to hear. I'll get to that. But first, let me keep going through the day. I want to ask you something while we're here. If you're watching this on the lounge on a Friday night, and you've got grandkids, when's the last time you actually thought about how their school day is structured? Not the test results, not the NAPLAN scores, the actual shape of their day. Because I never thought about it either until I had to explain it to someone who didn't grow up here. Tell me in the comments, does your grandkid walk to school? Do they get proper lunch break? I genuinely want to know if what I'm describing matches what you're seeing in your own family. Speaking of which, if you're getting something out of this, this is what I do on this channel. I'm an American who moved to Australia, and I share what it's actually like to leave the States and start over here. What works, what doesn't, what nobody warns you about, and what nobody back home will believe until you show them. If that's the kind of channel you want in your feed on a Friday night, hit subscribe. It genuinely helps me keep making these. Right? Back to the day. We're up to about 11 o'clock in the morning in our walkthrough, and this is where my mom got hit with the second big one. Sport. Every Aussie primary school kid does what's called HP, health and physical education, at least twice a week, usually more, plus there's often a designated sport day where the whole school does athletics or swimming or cross country. Swimming. That's the one that got her. I told her that in Queensland and a lot of other states, learning to swim is essentially baked into primary school. Schools run swimming programs at local public pools, and by the time most kids leave year 6, they can confidently swim laps. Not because their parents paid for private lessons, because the school did it. She said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Mom, this is the country with the most coastline per person in the world. Of course they teach kids to swim." According to Royal Life Saving Australia, this kind of school-based program is one of the reasons Australian drowning rates among children have continued to fall over the last decade. She sat with that for a second and said, "America has more pools than Australia, and we don't do that. We just don't." Then we got to the uniform. And I'll be honest with you, this one I expected her to push back on. Americans tend to have a thing about uniforms. They feel it's controlling. It's conformist. It's against individuality. Whatever. I explained how Aussie state schools have a uniform, usually a polo shirt, shorts, or skirt, the school hat, and how on a normal morning, my mate Dave doesn't have to have a single argument with his 10-year-old about what to wear. The clothes are on the chair. The kid puts them on. Done. My mom, the woman I expected to push back, said, "Do you know how much fighting I watch parents do over clothes? Do you know how many kids got pulled out of class because their shorts were too short or their shirt had a logo? We made it a war. You just made it a shirt." That was her phrase. You just made it a shirt. I'm going to remember that one. Now here's open loop number 2. Around lunchtime in our walkthrough, my mom asked me a question I didn't see coming. She said, "What do they do about active shooter drills here?" And the answer to that question and what happened on her face when I gave it to her, I'm going to come back to that in about 4 minutes. Stay with me. Let me keep moving through the day. Afternoon in Aussie primary school is usually a mix of literacy, numeracy, and what they call specialist subjects, music, art, languages, depending on the school. The school day ends at 3 p.m. Not 2:15. Not 3:45. 3. Parents know this. Grandparents know this. The whole country basically operates on the assumption that school ends at 3 and you can plan your life around it. My mom loved that. She said, "We've got 14 different end times in our county." 14. I had to ask her to repeat that because I didn't believe it. After school care exists, it's called OSHC, outside school hours care. And for working parents, it's heavily subsidies through the childcare subsidy from the federal government. According to Services Australia, eligible families can get up to 90% of those costs covered, depending on income. My mom is doing the math on her phone while I'm telling her this. She looks up and says, "We pay full price. There's no subsidy. People I know spend $2,000 a month on after-school care." I just nodded. There's nothing to add to that. Now, I want to come back to the question she asked me at lunchtime. The active shooter drill question. I told her the truth. I said, "Mom, Aussie schools don't really do those. There's a general lockdown procedure, sure. Schools practice emergency response. But the specific modern American ritual, the one where 6-year-olds are taught to hide under desks and stay silent and barricade doors with their tiny chairs, that doesn't exist here. Not in the way she's known it for the last 25 years of her career." Australia, after the Port Arthur massacre in 1996, passed the National Firearms Agreement and bought back over 650,000 firearms. Mass shootings in this country effectively stopped. Not slowed. Stopped in the way Americans understand them. She put her hand over her mouth. And I want to be careful how I say this next part, because it's the moment that everything else in our day shifted around. She said, "Yemo, I drilled 5-year-olds. I told 5-year-olds where to hide. I had to lie to them about why we were doing it. And these kids," she pointed out the window towards a school down the road, "these kids don't even know that's a thing." And then she cried, just for a second. She wiped it off and said, "Don't put that in your video." So I'm not going to show it, but I'm telling you about it because I think it meant. That was the turn for her. That was the moment she stopped seeing this as a fun little comparison between two countries and started seeing it as something else. This isn't really a video about school days. I think you probably figured that out a few minutes ago. This is a video about what happens when a country decides collectively that childhood is a thing worth protecting and then actually builds the systems to protect it. The hat rule isn't really about hats. It's about a country that looked at melanoma rates and said, "We're going to fix this even if it means a small rule kids complain about." The lunchbox thing isn't really about sandwiches. It's about a country that hasn't turned feeding a child into a transaction. The recess thing isn't really about play. It's about a country that hasn't sacrificed kids on the altar of test scores. And the lockdown thing is about a country that 29 years ago made a decision and has not unmade it since. That night, after dinner, my neighbor Lorraine came by the front fence. Lorraine's 72, 3 grandkids. She's lived in this street since 1978. My mom was telling her about the day we'd had, and Lorraine said something I want every Aussie watching this to hear. She said, "Love, we don't think about it. We just live in it. You don't notice the air until you leave it." And then she went inside. That's the line my mom couldn't get past. She sat at the bench for another 2 hours that night. I thought she was watching TV. She wasn't. She was looking up the cost of a 1-bedroom unit on the Sunshine Coast. She was looking up retirement visa requirements. She was looking up Medicare eligibility for permanent residence. My 68-year-old mom, who has voted in every American election since 1976, was quietly pricing out a life on the other side of the world. She didn't tell me until the next morning. Now, here's where I have to be fair, because I promised you both sides. Australian schools aren't perfect. NAPLAN results show real literacy and numeracy gaps, especially in remote and Indigenous communities. Teacher shortages are real. The Australian Education Union has been warning about this for years. Some kids fall through cracks here, just like everywhere. I'm not telling you this country has solved childhood. I'm telling you what an American teacher with 31 years of experience saw when she watched a normal day from the outside. And I know some of you watching are going to disagree with parts of this. Maybe you think uniforms are a step too far. Maybe you reckon the hat rule is nanny state. Maybe you think I'm romanticizing it because I'm new here. Tell me, genuinely, I want to know if I got it wrong. Because from where I'm standing, in this kitchen, in this suburb, after this week with my mom, this country is doing something for its kids that mine forgot how to do. And I'd love an Aussie watching this on a Friday night to tell me whether you see it the same way or whether I'm seeing it through new arrival eyes that haven't adjusted yet. I'll say this too. I think most Americans would hate hearing this video. Not because it's untrue, because deep down, they know it's true and they don't have the energy left to fix any of it. That's a hard thing for me to say out loud about my own country, but it's what I think. My mom flew home last Sunday. The morning she left, she stood at the front door with her suitcase, looked at me, and said, "I taught for 31 years. I thought I'd seen what school could be." I hadn't. That's all she said. She got in the car. I covered the healthcare side of this, the conversation we had about her Medicare card versus my Medicare card here, in another video on this channel, and honestly, it connects directly to what we just talked about. Same country, same idea, same quiet competence underneath everything. Lorraine was right. You don't notice the air until you leave it. My mom left it 41 years ago without ever knowing she'd left it. And it took her one Tuesday morning at a kitchen bench in Brisbane to feel what she'd been breathing the whole time.